For those old enough to remember that historic night 20 years ago, step outside tonight with your children or your grandchildren, lift your eyes skyward, and tell them of the flag, the American flag that still flies proudly in the ancient lunar soil.
As they attempt what man has never tried.
The Eagle has landed. Roger, 20, tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Good evening. America is to go back to the moon and on to Mars. President Bush says he wants to commit the United States to a sustained program of manned exploration of the solar system and the permanent settlement of space. Grand words from a man not up to now given to the visionary flourishes of his predecessor. But Mr. Bush did not commit himself to a target date for landing a man on Mars, as President Kennedy did for the moon landing in the 60s. I'll be asking a leading Republican on the House Space Committee in Washington whether this really is the green light for America's flagging space program. Also tonight, who'll be in the cabinet next week? Conservative backbenchers and the top political pundits tell Newsnight who the Prime Minister needs to help her win the next election. Subsidiaries of Britain's biggest high street bank broke the law in a major city share issue. The Department of Trade made this allegation today. Criminal investigations will now follow. And we have a special report from Japan. Will Sunday's elections end in defeat for the party and the culture which have created the Japanese economic miracle? But first, America's hard-pressed space community has been given a new lease of life tonight. They had been under severe congressional pressure for reduced funding, with doubts growing about the shape and direction of America's space program. But today, to their relief, President Bush has drawn the outline of a space program that will more than satisfy their ambitions. He's announced that he's directing Vice President Dan Quayle to draw up plans to launch a permanent space station to orbit the Earth, to put an American staging post on the moon, and from there to send a manned flight to Mars. But there's an important catch. Mr. Bush has not put a cost on his plans, nor has he set target dates for landing on the moon or on Mars. Mr. Bush spoke in Washington alongside the three men who took Apollo 11 to the moon on this day 20 years ago. He set out to breathe new life into the space program, and with it, a new sense of pride in America.
And next, for the new century, back to the moon, back to the future, and this time back to stay. And then a journey into tomorrow, a journey to another planet, a manned mission to Mars. Why the moon? Why Mars? Because it is humanity's destiny to strive, to seek, to find. And because it is America's destiny to lead.
So what are the steps that have to be taken if President Bush's new dream is to be realized? First, on the way to the moon and then on to Mars, America is already committed to the space station. It's an international project involving Europe, Japan, and Canada, as well as America, and it'll cost some £15 billion by the time it's fully operational at the end of the 90s. It'll have a central cluster of working and living modules sprouting great Lego-like tentacles, which will be the solar energy panels. And it'll be the existing space shuttle that'll heave the components into space that'll then be assembled as what's to be called Space Station Freedom. Well, with me is Geoffrey Pardo, who covered the moon landing 20 years ago for the BBC. Geoffrey, is the space station already fully budgeted for?
It's not very solidly budgeted at the moment. When we agreed the programme internationally 2 or 3 years ago, the figures were there and they were agreed. But at the moment, this year, Congress in the United States is trying actually to hold back nearly $500 million on the initial funding. That's very disturbing. If you lose the pace at the beginning, it's quite dangerous in terms of achieving your final timescales. And the Europeans and others are expressing some concern to Congress that they should reinstate this funding.
Right. Now, from the space station, it'll be a relatively short and easy hop to the moon. Easy in terms of propulsion, navigation and communication, but costing another £20 billion or so, and taking us perhaps to the year 2005. A moon base would be constructed, and it would be supplied by moon taxis, which would ferry people and equipment from the space station 250,000 miles away. Now, Geoffrey Pardo, what is the problem with the moon base? Because President Bush has not clearly given it a target date or the amount of money